project management in general within the movie industry is something that you're involved in. And then let's get on to some of the specific challenges that you face personally with Stella.
Absolutely. So, you know, it's a real honor being here, and I realize that I'm a bit of an outlier as a filmmaker until I started chatting with people, and I am blown away by the amount of knowledge and wisdom and leadership and talent in this room. It is humbling. And it's also humbling about the openness and the kindness that you're sharing. You know, I've heard so many stories that remind me of filmmaking. So filmmaking is what I would call the Olympic sport of project management. And the reason why I say that is because you're dealing with massive budgets, huge budgets, in a very short amount of time. So sometimes it takes 7 years to plan a film, and then you have 3 weeks to shoot it, and millions of dollars are on the line. So you're dealing with stakeholders, you're dealing with creatives, you're dealing with a distributed company, which many of you can relate to. You're dealing with leadership skills and troubleshooting and deliverables. We may have a different vocabulary for it, but it really is the same industry, and I think there's a lot of lessons you can learn from the creative industries and apply them to your own.
What were the key bottlenecks for going from the idea of Stella to it being now on general release and winning awards at film festivals around the world? I'm sure there were many, but give me an idea of 2 or 3 and how you got through them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, it takes about 7 years, mostly because of human foible, not because it's physics, to create a film. So you have people dropping out, you have funds dropping out. We set the goal that within a year, by the time a script is done, we wanted to fundraise, film, do post-production, do sales, get into film festivals and distribution, and we did it in under a year. And the way we did that is a couple of things, I think. One was finding financiers who really believed in the process. It's really important when you have anyone involved in a project. You know, the panel that we just heard, they mentioned this, about how important it is to find people who are not just involved and interested in the outcome, but interested in the process of making it. So again, we were in a remote region. A lot of people who worked on this film, we call it a punk rock approach. This is their first film. So we found someone who ran these huge, famous holiday homes, and we made her our set designer. She's never done a film before. We took a very famous musician who won an Oscar for his work for film, and we made him the cinematographer because we saw a talent there, and he lived there. And then we did it all during COVID, which lent itself to a whole host of challenges. But you know, anything can happen on a set, and it reminds me of a story. I know I chat a lot, so you do have to hold me back, but it reminds me of a story. I was at a producers conference, which is very similar to a project management forum, and Denzel Washington was on stage. And Denzel Washington was a producer of a film. He wasn't there as an actor, he was there as a producer, and the film was called The Debaters. And The Debaters was about young African-American kids. It's a true story in the South who started a debate team in the 1950s. This was not done then. And it was a powerful story, and they were halfway through filming. And Denzel, this is a true story, I heard him tell it, Denzel said the money just disappeared, halfway through filming. And he was really upset. People couldn't get paid. Folks started getting itchy. They didn't trust his leadership. People were wondering where this film was going. So he called the financier, his stakeholder, Harvey Weinstein. And he said, look, Harvey, the money's not appearing. What's going on? And Harvey said, look, I changed my mind. I thought the film's not going to sell unless you're in it. No one knows who these kids are, but they know who you are, and I know I'll make my money back. So I want you to rewrite the script and put yourself in. Denzel Washington couldn't believe it. He said, look, Harvey, that wasn't the deal. I want these young people to be in the forefront to shine, this new talent. If I'm in it, I'll usurp everything. He goes, put my name on the poster, but I'm not changing the script. And Harvey Weinstein hung up the phone. And Denzel didn't know what to do. He thought he'll cool off. So the next day, no money. Next day, no money. People started walking off set. This is Denzel Washington. And so he called his mother. And he said, Mom, I think I'm going to have to cancel this. Put some of my own money to it, but it's not going to work. So the next day, he woke up and all the money was there. Do you know what happened? Harvey Weinstein got a phone call from his mother. Denzel Washington's mother called Harvey Weinstein's mother. And she said, you give that nice man the money back. And they did it. And I was at another panel where it said, women make natural project managers, and I think it is true. But anything can happen on a set, and you have to show some real strong leadership skills and determination to keep on going.
And one of the things you said is that when you're on a project like a film, nobody knows each other at the start. They come together for this.
Right.
The actual filmmaking is a relatively small part of that 7-year process, and then they go their separate ways.
Yes.
So if you're the director or the writer or the producer, you've got to bring this kind of ragtag collection of disparate people together.
You do, under one vision, and everyone has a different discipline, so they all have their own skills and brilliance to share. And as a director or a project manager, I think you have to know the difference between compromise and collaboration, which is really important. Compromise is letting go of something, I think, integral to the goal, maybe even the spirit of the goal of what you're doing. Collaboration is really different. It's finding a solution and using your team as best you can and getting the best out of your team. When I was at NASA, it was the first time I was introduced to the term project management. It was from the arts, I had never heard of it before. And my then boss, Ed Hoffman, who's one of my heroes and a wonderful man, he was Chief Knowledge Officer for all of NASA, which still today I think is the coolest title ever. And I watched him work. He had a huge amount of responsibility, a huge amount of people to lead, all different kinds of projects happening. And he said, Jessica, there is one thing to do to be an effective leader. And I was like, well, this is good, I can remember one thing. And he said, make people feel appreciated and make them feel included, and that's it. And for a while I said, that can't be it. I mean, you're too oversimplifying it. There's gotta be other things, and ultimately he is right. And I use it every day on set. And if you make people feel appreciated and make people feel included in the process, you get the best out of your team. And as you mentioned, it's really important when you have only that team for 3 weeks and you may never see them again. You get one shot.
In terms of another of your projects, your memoir,
Yes.
that was a book, which is more of a solo sport, isn't it, rather than a team sport.
It is, yes.
Writing the book, not completely, but to a greater extent. But now, of course, it's becoming a TV series, and one of your collaborators, to borrow your phrase, is your ex-husband, which adds an extra layer of complexity.
It does. It does. And I have to say, he's a benign collaborator. I think the Hollywood studio system is a little bit more intimidating because they have other priorities in terms of what makes a good story, what they know will sell abroad. And that kind of starts ending up in the mix of bringing this story to life, maybe things you didn't really intend to be there. So you do have to let go of control a bit, and it comes back to that word, the compromise or collaboration. It reminds me of another story. Michael Caine, people who know who Michael Caine is, the actor, began on stage. And he said he was a young man, and he was waiting behind the wings. He had bust through a door, and on stage, 2 people were arguing. It was meant to be, it was in the play. And during the argument, someone took a chair and threw it, and it landed against the door he was supposed to go in on. This was during rehearsal. So he kind of pries the door open and hails the director down. And he says, excuse me, there's a chair where I'm supposed to come in. And the director throws down his hat and stands up, and he said, use the difficulty. And it really made an impression on him. And he said, look, if you want to make the audience laugh, trip over the chair. He said, if you want to make them cry, pick up the chair, throw it down, use it as an emotion, use the difficulty, use these unexpected things as a gift. So whether it's collaborating with your ex-husband, whether your budget gets slashed, whether it's anything, if the way you use it, if you treat it like a gift, it becomes a gift.
How do you toggle between these two worlds, the creative world and also the commercial world? And that's both in terms of project management. You've got to put your commercial hat on to go and get the money and deal with the movie money men and women.
Yes.
But then, obviously, you've got to be a creative. And as an addendum to that, when you go into the corporate world, you have to teach them about the creative world. They're very keen to learn about where ideas come from, about creativity, about storytelling. How do you straddle those two worlds?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. There's a quote that I put on my desk by Antonia Portia, who was a South American poet, invented the printing press, said, I know what I have given you. I don't know what you've received. And stories are a great bridge, a great communicator, but if you're making them in a vacuum, there's no point. So the commercial part of your brain really needs to be humble and say, this is the story I want to tell. Is it communicating? I mean, it gets so basic as, practice whatever speech you're doing, an idea you have in front of a friend, and just look at their face. See where they get confused, see where they're interested. And there's someone I really admire, Jay O'Callahan, who's a storyteller. And he teaches something called appreciations. It sounds naive, but it's not. It sounds simple, but it's not. And I see a lot of corporations, when I work with science organizations especially, kill ideas before they have time to really blossom, because they're either so enthusiastic about it, you start adding your own stuff to it, or you strike it down too early, you reject it before it really has kind of a time to live, a time to thrive. And Jay O'Callahan's appreciations solve that, and I wish more organizations use this, and I do it in my own work, which is, let's say you're writing a script, let's say you have a new idea, let's say you're trying to be innovative and come up with a solution. If someone comes to you on your team and says, look, this is my first draft, what do you think? First round, you only tell them what's working. And be specific. So you can say, I loved what you did with that character, it really moved me, especially the way you described them. Or that word choice was very powerful. You only need a couple and you send them away again. And what's so interesting is that when they're redrafting, when they're thinking about the idea, when they're processing, they start leaning into what's working. And when they come back and they say, look, this is my final version, you notice there's a bunch of new wonderful things in there. And then that's the time when it's complete, that's the time for criticism and collaboration. But before then, it's like coming up to an artist and saying, make me something brilliant. And when they get stuck, you take the paintbrush out of their hand and start painting on the canvas for them. I see that happen really well-intended over and over and over again, and it kills ideas before they start.
What about selling the ideas and selling your projects? You write a memoir, you've got to promote it. You create this movie, you've got to promote it. Same with the TV series. I remember chatting to Jeremy Irons, the actor, and he said, in Dubai, and he said, 90% of the fee that I get from a film is promoting it. 10% of it is for actually acting, but then you've got to go and do the junkets and go out and sell it. It's a massive part of the industry. It was ever thus, but even more so now.
That's such a good point too. So in full transparency, I'm working on multi-million-dollar projects for TV. This project in particular, the trailer that you saw, is $250,000. That was our budget in pounds. Which, to give you a sense, for a costume drama, when I called a marketing person, so you get them involved at the very beginning so that you know you can sell it, I told her what our total budget was, and she started laughing. I had to kind of hold the phone out, and she said, I'm sorry, that's half my full salary, just for the marketing. And so we made this film, and we did it. I used the IKEA model, which is, they want to sell a stool for £8. What's the best stool you can make? So what is the best movie we could make for $250,000? And I think we did it. And then no one wanted it, because we didn't have a marketer on board, we didn't have a sales agent on board, we couldn't afford them. So the question was, then what do you do? When you do something that's off-road, that's innovative, how do you sell it? And it was a hard-earned lesson, but there were a couple of things that worked for us. And the first one was, and I'll borrow, thank you for mentioning folklore and mythology, because it is an absolute passion of mine. I'm glad this talk is not about that, because I couldn't keep it to half an hour. But in folklore and mythology, there's something called a donor figure. And that's a character in many stories that gives the hero just what they need. A key, a phrase, a magic potion to go along their adventure. So the first thing we did was identify donor figures. Who are the people that cared about the process, that cared about the outcome? And we found a couple of folks to write articles for us. And they were tiny, they were just in Scotland. But telling, we hear storytelling is important, and it's no different in film. We made a story, but there is a story about the story that you have to communicate. So after getting in a couple of papers, folks in England saw that, then we got national papers, and based on that I could go to some sales agents and they could help us sell the film. So finding those donor figures, finding the loudspeakers, telling your story helped.
Let's talk about real estate. We're in Dubai, center of the world's, well, Bloomberg says it's the world's greatest real estate boom at the moment. We set a record last week, the most homes in a year ever sold, more than $25 million each. We did 56 last year, New York did 23.
Oh my God, that's so amazing.
And it was next. So we like real estate. You're involved in real estate
Yes.
as well, on a slightly different level though. You live in quite a remote part of Scotland that's an epicenter for books and
Yes.
the literary community, and you have a small Airbnb,
Yes.
or your community runs a small Airbnb there. What is the waiting list for that Airbnb?
7 years
Which makes it the most popular Airbnb
in the world.
in the world?
Yes.
Okay, it's not a Dubai record, but it's your record. Hey, you did
It is.
middle of nowhere.
Thank you. When I first came to Scotland, I had a dream. I was working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. It was as beautiful and sunny as it is here today. And I kept on having a vision of working in a bookshop by the sea in Scotland, and it was cold, and there was a long wooden counter, and I could see a bell above the door. I could even smell the old musty books, and I thought this must be a movie that I should be writing. But it kept on haunting me, really, and the more I kept on examining it, I realized that the girl behind the main counter was myself. And I thought, why am I working all the time and letting my fictional characters have all the adventures? I'm gonna do this. So I typed in used bookshop Scotland to Google, and Wigtown came up, which is Scotland's national book town. It's a town of 900 people and 16 bookshops right by the sea. And I had an incredible adventure, and it got me over to Scotland. And I thought, I can't be the only crazy American that has visions of working in a bookshop by the sea in Scotland. I probably have watched too many romantic comedies for my own good. But we started using the community. It's community owned. We started a bookshop where anyone around the world can come and have their own bookshop and live above it. You even get a little bicycle to go around the town in. You set your own opening hours. You can change up the stock if you'd like. You do the window displays. And I was wrong. I wasn't the only crazy American. People from around the world really wanted this fantasy without, like I did, giving up their entire life to do it. So we broke Airbnb. We had to have a meeting with them because more people wanted to sign up for the calendar than the calendar would allow 3 years in advance. So they created a special waiting list for us. And now it is 7 years to come.
So in terms of creating the next book,
Yes.
or the next movie, or the next TV series, whatever it may be, what role will generative AI play in that? We were chatting a little bit earlier, you and I, and also Shireen, who moderated the previous session, about the way that ChatGPT is influencing and infiltrating the creative industries. Hero or villain?
It's a great question. Potential excellent collaborator is what I would say. So, I was floored when going to Google and seeing that not just you could generate a script, and most things are right now derivative. So if you wanted to write another Spider-Man, it can do that pretty well. If you wanted to create a whole new original idea, it can't really do that yet. You still need artists. But what I was really shocked by and impressed by, and thank you, Ben, for showing us, is that you could type in a sentence and you could create a whole video scene. And the technology is not there yet, but I was like, oh, that's me gone, and that's the cinematographer gone, and that's the location scout gone. But actually, in reality, I think at best, artists and storytellers, they create things that are almost like medicine for the community. They have these really interesting invisible antennae that read the zeitgeist and feel and see things that we might need to feel and see in return. And I don't think AI can do that, but I think it can really make it easier for artists to offer their work to the world. When I was at the synthetic biology lab at Edinburgh University, I came in and had to interview a scientist there. I was a storyteller. I was teaching them how to tell stories, and I really loved him. He's a genius scientist, Abdenrah Sufi. And I come in and I sit down and I'm like, I'm here to help you communicate. And I could just see his shoulders slump, and he's like, oh God. He's like, just go look around. My walls are glass. I share the office with someone else. When I want to get a coffee, they believe in this open plan thing and knowledge sharing thing, so I go out and everyone's talking to me. I come back in and all these students are lining up to chat with me. He's like, I have no time to think. My only time to think is on the bus ride from the university to home. And what I thought was so interesting about that, and I learned a real lesson that day, is that ideas, this is going back to AI, but real original ideas, ideas that type into the zeitgeist, ideas that we need, ideas that are innovative and our solutions come from a place that none of us allow enough time for, which is to let our mind wander. You know, when's the last time you looked out the window without an agenda? Without this desire, I need to solve this problem, I need to check my phone. It's genuinely, almost like you're a child again, daydreaming. Just seeing where your mind takes you. Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, would call that the place of creative incubation. He said that everyone needs a time of day where no one knows where you are, you don't know what the newspaper says that morning, you don't know what anyone owes you, you don't know what you owe anyone. And if you sit in that place enough, maybe tomorrow nothing happens, in a week nothing happens, but sure enough, if you keep on honoring that place, something will arise, something original and interesting. And we need more time to let our mind wander, and AI can never take that away.
Talk to me a little bit about doing what you do in a very remote part of the world. You're from Boston.
Yes.
Major national and international city. You spend a lot of time in Los Angeles with that community. Scotland has Edinburgh and Glasgow as its relatively big cities.
Yeah.
But you live in a more remote one. We're here in Dubai, a very big city gathering
Yes.
big important government leaders and business people. How does the world get some of this, not just creativity, but also the commercial impetus to make it viable into more outlying areas, whether it's outlying areas of the United Arab Emirates, rural areas of Saudi Arabia, or Scotland, because cities and urbanization is such a powerful force.
It is, you know, that is really insightful because that is the main challenge right now for the Scottish Government. About 3 days a week, I work for an organization called Expo North, which consults for the Scottish Government about how do they support the creative industries. They know the creative industries are a good thing. They're like these beautiful economic ecosystems that employ folks from catering to artists to technicians, and they know it can really regenerate especially rural areas and economy, and they just don't know how to make that happen. So we look at ways, and I have to say one thing is infrastructure. Making sure that artists can afford to use the infrastructure in a city is really important. Make sure that if you do want to film in remote locations, the trains are working on time, that people can get there. To recognize that the creative industries offer sustainable employment. So on Stella, what we did was we offered mentorships for people who have never even been on a film set before, who live in rural communities, to get that first film credit. Because it's like the chicken or the egg. You can get a job in a rural place if you have the film credit, but because you live in a rural place, you can't get the opportunity. So really making sure you support stories that are based in more remote locations, making sure that the government's on board. And one thing I have noticed, and I've only been here 3 days, and one thing I'm deeply touched by, and that I can hear in a lot of voices and a lot of the activities, is that a real successful ecosystem of the creative industries, or any really project in general, requires a sense of we did it. Not I did it, but understanding that it's part of a whole. And my goodness, the UAE, Dubai, I can hear that's a strength of theirs. And it was a strength of NASA too, that I didn't land on the moon, we landed on the moon. It's being inclusive.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm keen, just before we wrap up, to flip, if you like, the argument. We've been asking you what a place like Dubai, the UAE, the Middle East can learn from your experience in project management. What can you take away from Dubai, from what you've seen, what you've heard these conversations, and apply it to the creative industries in a rural part of Europe?
I really want to bring all of Scotland here. We can learn so much. I'm so deeply touched and really inspired and reinvigorated by the openness to collaborate, to the kind of deep understanding that things work together, that you bring people into the room to chat about it, that you're not afraid of taking risks, that there is, you know, the 3 things that I have noticed at NASA when I was there on a film set that make incredibly good leaders, and I think are the strengths of what I'm hearing from people here, are flexibility, but with direction. It's no good being flexible and saying, oh, I can handle anything, but really not understanding the direction and purpose of what you're doing. I had an actor I won't name names, but I had an actor who was giving me a lot of trouble on set. He was one of the kind of more famous ones, and he was starting to make me nervous because he was getting quite explosive. And at one point, he really did yell at me in front of the cast and crew. And so I took him aside and yelled at him back. And he was so happy. And I was yelling about the point of what he was doing and why he was doing this. And it suddenly occurred to me that what he needed was to reconnect with the purpose of why he's doing what he's doing every single morning. And he needed it in a style of almost like a coach revving an athlete before a game, and that I could do for him. But flexibility, being able to be flexible with direction is important. Resilient optimism. You know, we heard some stories today of when things don't go right, but you do it anyway and you keep on learning. Resilient optimism, and again, making sure you get the best out of your team. And that's a lesson that really Scotland can learn about making people feel appreciated and included.
Last question from me. Lessons that you would share to people in the audience, and there will be a few of you out there who've got a secret, the beginnings of a script,
yes,
in a third drawer, in your spare bedroom, or wherever it may be, somewhere on your phone. It could be anywhere, but people will have these creative projects.
Yes.
What's the one lesson you share with them about getting that off the ground and making it into reality so that it's at film festivals?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. First, take time for yourself. Really take time for yourself. So if you have a burgeoning creative idea, it can't come out of your head unless you sit down and put it on paper. And as much as you can, get that self-critic out, because they have no place at the beginning part of the birth of an idea. Don't judge it. If it's in you and it's thriving in you, I bet it is wonderful. And then the second thing is, when you feel like sharing it, road testing it, find someone, genuinely someone very smart and gentle who can do appreciations. It is the most powerful thing you can do. If you want to go on the road of getting to a film festival or getting your idea out or even just starting a script, a book, get it down on paper and find that reader who will allow you to thrive.
Jessica, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much indeed. Distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Jessica Fox.
Thank you.
And with that,